On today's show, we're going to be doing a featured ingredient deep dive. Is rice a thyroid healthy food? This is a food that we often end up eating a bit more of when we go gluten-free. And for so many thyroid thrivers who end up needing to greatly reduce or in most cases completely eliminate gluten from our diets in order to feel well, it's easy to end up eating a lot of rice. Is this a thyroid healthy food? Let's take a closer look in today's featured ingredient deep dive. Hello, Thyroid Thrivers. Welcome back to another episode of Thyroid-Healthy Bites, a weekly podcast dedicated to helping you live well and eat well so you can feel well. I'm Ginny Mahar, your host and the face behind the apron at hypothyroidchef.com. Hello, Thyroid Thrivers, and welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you today about rice. Is it a thyroid healthy food? I have done a number of these featured ingredient deep dives on the show and on the blog, and I plan on continuing to do them. I love to dive into the research around these foods and really take a magnifying glass to them and look at, are they good for us? Are there things we need to know about them? Are they bad for us? Are there certain thyroid-friendly nutrients? Let's take a microscope to white rice today. Rice is a staple grain throughout much of the world. It's tasty, it's comforting, it makes a really easy gluten-free substitute for our favorite wheat-based staples. Stuff like rice pasta, rice flour, or a fluffy bed of rice to serve your main course on can be a really welcome solution to the frustrations of trying to avoid gluten. And as thyroid patients who want to feel optimal, again, many of us are gluten-free. When we're navigating a gluten-free diet, rice can be a real helper. It can enable us to feel like we can go out to dinner and eat like a, quote, normal person. It can help us figure out how to feed finicky kiddos without relying on gluten and make family-friendly meals that everyone can enjoy together. Rice's simplicity can soothe us when we're sick. It can satisfy us when we're hungry. And rice-based flour blends give us a way to keep baking great-grandma's cookie recipe in a way that tastes a lot like her original wheat flour version. Rice is our go-to gluten backup plan, but you might not realize that rice does have a dark secret. And as a thyroid thriver, it's one you need to know about. We're going to talk all about it on today's episode. Before we dive in, if you want to know more about thyroid-friendly foods, where to get started, what should I eat, what should I not eat, the best place to start is by downloading my free guide, the Thyroid Healthy Grocery Guide. There's so many lists out there of foods we're supposed to avoid. This is a list of over 130 delicious, colorful, nutrient-dense foods we can eat. So it includes proteins, produce, seasonings and condiments, sweets and treats, healthy fats, and gluten-free whole grains, including some rice. So there's all kinds of information on there. It's a great way to get connected with me. So if you'd like to download that for free instantly, you can check that out at hypothyroidchef.com/grocery. And I'll put the link for that Thyroid Healthy Grocery Guide in the show notes as well. Okay, back to the show. Let's start by talking about what you need to know about rice. Don't worry, I'm not going to cancel rice. As always, what you choose to eat or not eat is up to you. But you're here because you want to get empowered. You want to get informed. You want to eat in a thyroid healthy way. And just like there are things that you need to know about, say, eating swordfish or tuna, for example, there are things that you need to know about eating rice. I'm going to tell it to you straight, and I'm also going to share some solutions so that you can eat rice in the safest possible way. So let's just start with the bad news. We're going to rip off the Band-Aid and get it over with. The problem with rice is this: heavy metals. So all varieties of rice, including white, brown, and wild rice, have some heavy metals such as lead, arsenic, and mercury in them. Those heavy metals may be present to varying levels. And this is on account of the way that rice is grown. It's grown in paddies, which are watery beds. And that exposes the plants to a higher amount of heavy metals than other crops because it's grown in that what is essentially groundwater. Now, across the globe, Heavy metal pollution has made a mark. This is an unavoidable reality these days. Our air, water, and soil they contain heavy metals. And this is a result of our dependence on fossil fuels, coal-fired fuel plants, agricultural chemicals, and industrial chemicals. All of those things emit heavy metals into our environment. And sadly, heavy metals in our air, food, and water is simply an unavoidable byproduct of our modern existence. The thing with heavy metals is that they're forever chemicals. So once they're released into the environment, they're impossible to remove. They last forever. And that's the reason why they are therefore impossible to avoid. Those heavy metals haven't accumulated in our environment, and we, as humans, are part of this ecosystem. We're part of this environment. So those heavy metals also accumulate in our bodies. Since rice is grown in water, in groundwater, those watery beds, right? It gets infused with whatever is in that water, good or bad. Now, when it comes to heavy metal avoidance and mitigation, knowledge is both power and protection. And this is especially true for our thyroid because heavy metal toxicity has been linked to thyroid dysfunction and autoimmunity, among other rampant health issues like cancer, autism, and Alzheimer's. So let's talk a little bit about that before we move on. Why are heavy metals specifically bad news for thyroid patients? So heavy metals, as we sort of touched on already, set up camp in our tissues where they get stored along with other toxins in our body. And this is especially true for our thyroid because the thyroid metabolizes things really quickly. And because of that, more stuff passes through it, including more toxins. More toxins pass through our thyroid. And sometimes those toxins are so chemically similar to iodine, which the thyroid uses to make thyroid hormone, that the thyroid gets confused and it says, oh, we want that. Let's grab that because we can use that to do our job. Well, in some cases, it's not iodine. It's actually a heavy metal like mercury or arsenic, for example. Studies have shown a direct link between mercury exposure and an increase in thyroid antibodies. So we're talking about thyroid autoimmunity like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. And the sad fact is that it's impossible to avoid heavy metals in our modern world completely. But the key here is not to be afraid, it's to be aware of those sources of heavy metal exposure so that we can be smart about it. And that includes using cautious moderation and best choice practices when we choose to consume foods that are vulnerable to heavy metals, including things like swordfish, tuna, and rice. Okay, so let's talk about 5 different things that we can do to consume rice safely. I don't want to just, blast you with the bad news. If you want rice to be a part of your diet, let's talk about what you can do to consume it safely. Number 1 is just moderation. It's really easy for those of us who are gluten-free to get a little too heavy on the rice and the rice products. So just be mindful of how much rice you consume. It's always a good idea. It's a great idea really with any food. And, when we have those dietary restrictions, like dairy is the same way. We might end up eating a lot of coconut products or a lot of almond products, almond milk and almond this and almond that. Sometimes people can end up developing a sensitivity to those things. So just another reason why it's important to pay attention if you're ending up leaning too heavily on a food in your diet. So use moderation with rice. Tip number 2, rinse your rice. So this is a really simple, practical thing you can do if you're going to cook rice. According to research, this is one of the best ways to significantly reduce heavy metals is just by rinsing it very thoroughly before cooking. That's been shown to remove 50% or more of those heavy metal residues. So that's significant. Another thing you can do is soak your rice overnight like you would beans. And you can change the water a couple times if you have a chance to. It's just another good way to help flush out and reduce the heavy metal residues on the rice. Now, you have to be aware here that soaking your rice for hours is going to change the texture and it's going to change the cooking time. Rinsing it, on the other hand, will not. So every time my husband or I prepare rice, We rinse it for probably about 2 minutes under, we have like a filtered water tap on our sink. So we rinse it in that filtered water, not just until the water runs clear, but we really try to go for at least a couple minutes to really flush any kind of residue off the rice. And that leads me to tip number 3, which is use filtered water, because even our tap water can be an additional source of heavy metals. And what we want to be aware of with that heavy metal exposure, because of our modern environment and our dependence on fossil fuels and all of that, what are we going to do? We're going to be aware and try to make the best choices we can for our health and for the health of our families. So filtering our water, of course, drinking filtered water, but also preparing food and preparing our rice with filtered water can just be another thing you can do to minimize and eliminate that heavy metal exposure with a filter that removes things like heavy metals, which is pretty standard for a lot of water filters. But it is important to do your homework with your water filter to make sure that it is removing what you want it to remove. Tip number 4, cook with lots of water. So another way that you can further reduce heavy metals in your rice is to try boiling it in plenty of water, just like you would pasta. So bring a big pot of water to a boil, put the rice in, test it. When it's tender and ready to eat, you simply drain off the cooking water. The end result is not the same as the typical way of cooking rice in a certain ratio of rice to water so that it essentially steams. It's a little bit sticky, it's fluffy, but I want to mention that option because that is a way to further reduce those heavy metal toxins. And last but not least, number 5 is choose your rice carefully. So there's been a lot of studies on this done from around the world because arsenic and other heavy metals in rice is a global issue. And testing methods have produced varied results. This is the environment, it's nature, things aren't always consistent, right? But one constant in the results of this testing is that white basmati rice from California is among the most consistently low in heavy metals. I'll say that again. White basmati rice from California is among the most consistently low in heavy metals. Now that's followed by white basmati rice from India and Pakistan. So those are also good choices. So let's talk a little bit more about that, about best choices we can make when we're sourcing and purchasing rice. So historical data suggests that California rice is lower in heavy metals than rice grown in the southern US, which is another big rice producing region. And the reason for this is because chemicals were used in cotton farming across the southern US. Back in the day, lead arsenate insecticides were used for this pest called the boll weevil. And those were banned in the 1980s because we realized, wow, this is a highly toxic pesticide. It's leaving these, forever metals in our soil, including lead. We got to, stop using this. But as we know, these are forever chemicals that live on in our soil, and that heavy metal legacy from lead arsenate insecticides used for the boll weevil, that legacy lives on in the southern soil where half of our US rice is grown. So if you're looking for a safe bet, California's Lundberg Farms in particular has taken some pretty significant measures to address and monitor heavy metals in their rice farming. They're super transparent about it, which I think is very admirable. It's refreshing. It's especially useful to us as thyroid thrivers who are trying to make mindful food choices. I'm not sponsored by Lundberg in any way. This is just what, I found from my research on rice. So you can go to the Lundberg Farms website and search about heavy metals, and you'll find all kinds of information, which is nice to see. And they're constantly monitoring and testing, which, kind of gives you that peace of mind. Also, this is that white basmati rice from California. So the Lundberg Farms basmati rice is a very safe and reliable choice. Again, not sponsored by Lundberg in any way, but it is my go-to. It's what I buy all the time because I know what I know about rice and the issues with heavy metals in rice. You might be wondering, what about organic rice? Can I just buy organic? That'll protect me, right? Not necessarily. The organic label will protect you, but only in the long run. Okay, let me explain. So this is an interesting finding. Organic rice did not show lower levels of heavy metals. Heavy metal pollution is systemic, right? There's no way of keeping groundwater free of it. So in this case, buying organic is not a reliable way to avoid arsenic or other heavy metals in your rice. That said, buying organic is always encouraged as a thyroid healthy practice for several reasons. First, it's more environmentally friendly and it does a lot less to contribute to that worsening heavy metal pollution in our environment. So do buy organic whenever possible if you can access it, if you can afford it, and know that it is helping in the long run. You're helping all thyroid thrivers, okay, by buying a product that emits less heavy metal residue from industrial agricultural chemicals into our groundwater and our environment. However, no, the organic label cannot be relied upon to avoid heavy metals in your rice. It doesn't make a difference. And that's because we're all sharing the same groundwater in those watery beds or those paddies that rice is grown in. I'll tell you a little bit about my personal approach to rice in my diet and in cooking for my family. And I'll preface this by saying that what works for me might not be right for you. I know plenty of thyroid thrivers, including some people I'm thinking of in my Thrivers Club membership, who wouldn't go near grains with a 10-foot pole because they do not thrive on grains. We all have our own circumstances that are going to come into play when we're making dietary choices because there is that bio-individual component. Thyroid healthy eating is ultimately personalized, okay? And as a rule, I personally try not to rely too heavily on any one food or staple and focus instead on the widest dietary variety possible, which not only provides the most nutrient diversity, but also I think helps protect me from ending up with, mononutrients or eating too much of one food. In this case, like with rice, if I were leaning way too heavily on rice, might be exposing myself and my family to too much of those heavy metals. It is not a mainstay in my life, but rice and wild rice are present in my current thyroid healthy diet and in my menu planning. And yes, definitely more so since I've eliminated gluten. My family and I do eat and enjoy white, brown, and wild rice in moderation. When we're at home, when we're eating something that's accompanied by rice, like say a Thai curry or a stir fry, I often cook up a bag of something else like frozen organic cauliflower rice. Maybe I'll have that and, my family still wants the sticky rice or the basmati rice or whatever. But still, I do appreciate the real thing once in a while. And eating some rice also enables me to do things like travel and dine out and socialize more easily. That food freedom is important to me, and I choose to take it where I can get it. That said, I do experience a lot less brain fog, I've found, when I keep my consumption of gluten-free grains below a certain threshold. It's not that I can't have any grains, it's just that I can't have too much grains, or I do start to notice some symptoms. Eliminating gluten-free grains entirely doesn't really feel necessary or worth it to me at this point. Instead, I use moderation and I use those tactics that I shared with you earlier to reduce our heavy metal exposure. As a family, the vast majority of the rice that we buy and consume is that organic white basmati or sometimes jasmine rice. And yes, usually from Lundberg Farms. We always rinse our rice in a fine mesh strainer for at least 2 minutes. The water is clear, and we spend extra time running it under filtered water prior to cooking. We do also eat some rice-based products occasionally, like gluten-free bread or gluten-free pasta. On pasta night, a lot of times I'll whip up zoodles or spaghetti squash for myself while the boys have their regular wheat pasta. But I do also appreciate the ability, the choice to occasionally enjoy my favorite brown rice-based gluten-free pasta from Jovial. This is a company out of Italy where the daughter had an autoimmune disease and the parents were like, we got to figure out a way to make decent pasta. And so Jovial they make a number of different products. Some of them are grain-free and are very good. but their pasta that is most like the real thing is their kind of standard brown rice pasta. Again, not sponsored by them in any way. This is just products that I know and love and depend on so that I can have real pasta once in a while that is gluten-free and it's made with brown rice. Now, we don't do that a lot, but I do occasionally enjoy that. And the nice thing about having those options is that my whole family enjoys that jovial pasta. And you know what? Sometimes when you're in a hurry, it's just nice to make one dinner, one pot of pasta. Well, my baking endeavors do typically fall into the paleo category, which means the grain-free category. I do occasionally use a rice-based gluten-free flour blend. My favorite is King Arthur's Measure for Measure. I use that once in a while, not often at all. I would say maybe once a month at most to make a batch of huckleberry pancakes or Christmas cookies that taste like the traditional cookies that I grew up with. You know, when that's important, I like having that option. And like our favorite rice-based jovial pasta, this is a really good compromise, I feel, when I want to bake something that everyone can enjoy that's just like the real thing. Plus, my son has a tree nut allergy, and paleo baked goods really commonly rely on nut flours, and those are often off limits for him. So if I want to make something that we can all enjoy, I will use a rice-based flour blend. Here's the real question though. Are my heavy metals high because I eat some rice and rice products? I would say like once a week, okay? No. And the reason I know this is because I have done several HTMA tests. HTMA stands for hair tissue mineral analysis. And what it is you take a snippet of hair, like from the back of your scalp, but really, close to your scalp. And what this can do is it can show you all the minerals and metals in your body, both, good and bad metals. Like our body needs some of those metals, but it shows all those minerals and metals in your body over a months long period of time. Now, when you compare that to, say, a blood draw, the blood draw is really just showing what's going on in your body at that one specific moment in time. But a hair tissue mineral analysis really shows like that big picture, like what is going through your body and your bloodstream that can be shown in your hair. I have had several of those done without seeing any increases in heavy metals. In fact, over time, I've seen decreases in my heavy metal levels because I also make a point to drink filtered water. I also make a point to incorporate a lot of foods that support the body's detox pathways, like wild blueberries, beets, artichokes. I also make a point to incorporate foods that support the body's ability to rid itself of heavy metals. These are chelating foods. Okay, that's what chelation means, is to be able to move and remove those heavy metals from the body. And two of my favorite chelating foods are turmeric and cilantro. And I've done featured ingredient blog posts on both turmeric and cilantro. I'll share those in the show notes for you in case you're curious. But I mean, any chance I get, I am incorporating turmeric and cilantro into my diet because I know not only do they taste good, but they're going to help protect me from those heavy metals and help me with any kind of accumulation I may already have in my body of those heavy metals. So all in all, I feel safe eating and feeding my family some rice and rice products because we use moderation and we use the safest practices in preparing them. We make our best choices about where we source the rice. My husband knows all this too. If he's shopping, he knows what rice to buy. He knows if he's making the rice, he's got to rinse it for a long time. So it's all about that awareness and making those best choices using moderation and all of that. Before we wrap it up, let's talk briefly about the thyroid healthy nutrition highlights of white rice. Because white rice has this reputation for not really being healthy. It's, we see it as being stripped of nutrients. It's had that hull removed, unlike brown rice. There's that perception that brown rice is healthier when actually in many cases it is higher in heavy metals. And not only is white rice lower in fiber than brown rice, it's also high in carbs and low in protein. Now, some white rice is enriched with additional nutrients. So when you buy white rice, you do need to check the ingredient label. The organic white basmati that I use and recommend from Lundberg Farms is not enriched. So it's just rice. That's the one ingredient. Nutrient density is a key tenet of thyroid healthy eating, and I wouldn't describe white rice as being nutrient dense. However, it does contain some key thyroid supporting nutrients. So let's look at those. Some key thyroid supporting nutrients in white rice are selenium. Selenium helps us convert thyroid hormones, and it can lower those autoimmune thyroid antibodies, which is great. Interestingly enough, selenium also plays a very protective role for the thyroid, protecting it from heavy metal toxicity. And this, factors in with rice. It also factors in with high mercury foods like tuna. The selenium, in a way, and if it's high enough, can somewhat cancel out the risk of the heavy metals in those foods. So very cool that selenium is in there. And selenium is like one of the best nutrients that we can, try to make sure is prominent in our diets as thyroid thrivers. Not too much. I don't want to be misunderstood on that, because like a lot of nutrients, you can overdo it on selenium, and selenium toxicity can happen. We don't want to overdo it on selenium, but just making sure that we're eating a diverse, colorful, nutrient-dense diet is typically going to contain lots of selenium in our foods, and that's a good thing for the thyroid. Another really cool nutrient found in white rice is resistant starch. This is a powerful gut health supporter. Resistant starch is a special kind of fiber that makes it all the way through the digestive tract, all the way to the colon. And along the way, it's feeding the beneficial bacteria in our gut. So it is like fertilizer for our gut microbiome. Resistant starch is awesome for our gut health. Now, one thing to note here, and this is interesting, is that the resistant starch in white rice increases significantly after rice has been cooled and then reheated. So that's just another reason to love those leftovers, right? And usually when we're making like a big Thai curry or something and a pot of rice, there's leftovers. I rely on those for lunch. And while I'm not going to the lengths of preparing, cooling, and reheating the rice before we eat it the first time, I sure do appreciate that about the leftovers the next day, knowing that I'm getting some of that gut health supportive resistant starch. Another key thyroid supporting nutrient found in white rice is zinc. Zinc is crucial to proper thyroid hormone conversion, so converting that inactive T4 to active T3 thyroid hormone. Zinc is also great for our immunity, our metabolism, our sexual health, and so many other things. And finally, B vitamins are found in white rice, including thiamine and niacin. And these can help boost low energy, and they're commonly deficient amongst thyroid patients. Any kind of B vitamins are like our metabolism helpers. One 3.5-ounce serving of white rice contains 123 calories, 1 gram of fat, 17 milligrams of sodium, 30 grams of carbohydrates, 1 gram of dietary fiber, or less than 1 gram, which is pretty low. However, 3.7 grams of resistant starch, and this is for unenriched white rice, 2.9 grams of protein, 8% of the recommended dietary intake for vitamin B6, 18% for manganese, 5% RDI for thiamine, 12% RDI for niacin, those are those B vitamins, 2% RDI of magnesium, 4% RDI of copper, 6% phosphorus, 1% folate, 13% of selenium, so it's pretty significant, 1% iron, and 2% of the RDI for zinc. So there's a lot of good in rice. Again, not a super nutrient-dense food. For those of us who don't eat rice, there are plenty of other sources of those nutrients. So in conclusion, whether or not to eat rice, or how often, or what kind of rice is a personal choice. As always, do what works for you. Do what works for your unique body, and make the best informed choices possible with the help of reliable information and your healthcare team. I really hope that today's episode has informed and empowered you to do just that. In the future, if you decide to make and enjoy a pot of rice, you now know which rice is best to purchase and consume and how to prepare it in order to minimize any health risks. And that is what making thyroid healthy choices is all about. Once again, if you'd like to know more about thyroid healthy eating, you can check out my free thyroid-friendly grocery guide featuring over 130 delicious gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free foods you can eat. You can download that at hypothyroidchef.com/grocery, and the link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today to empower yourself and to learn more about these thyroid-friendly ingredients. If you've enjoyed the show, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your feedback, and especially those reviews, truly do help so much to support the show. I'm Ginny Mahar, your thyroid health and cooking coach, wishing you happy cooking, happy thriving, and the best of health. See you next time.